Today, we're talking to Chris Thomas. He runs Dowie Doole Winery in South Australia. And Chris, I have to say, I normally kick off with a question about the history of the winery, and we absolutely want to hear all about the history. But I'm also really fascinated with the buildings that you have on the site. They just look super interesting. So I'd love to hear a little bit about the buildings as well as the history of the winery, if we can.
Yeah, no, thanks. Thanks, Wendy. Look, the Dowie Doole tasting pod, which I'm standing in now, is a real reflection of Dowie Doole's identity, I suppose. And it's our home in McLaren Vale that we opened in 2019 in the heart of our vineyard in Tatachilla. And it's really trying to be an immersive little tasting pod. And what we didn't want was a sort of standard cookie cutter building by the side of the road, etc. So it's right in the middle of the vineyard, and it's made out of sort of upscaled shipping containers, and it sort of sits with a 360-degree view of vines. It faces true north, so we've got solar panels. We reclaim all the water, so it's basically off the grid. We do have power to the building in case we've got to function at night time and things, and we run out of battery power. But essentially, it's meant to be sort of set in the vineyard. And it was really cool when we were going through the design process. I found this amazing architect to work with, Ollie Scholes, who does sort of high-end domestic homes, I suppose, around South Australia. And we're yin and yang, a bit like the two vineyards of Dowie Doole. We're very different. Like, I'm a little 5'3" stocky winemaker, and Ollie's this like 6'2" skinny German guy. So we'd always have to sit down next to one another for photos and things. But I remember walking around the vineyard, and I said to Ollie, look, I really want the vineyard to be sustainable, and I want it to be immersive. And the vineyard sort of undulates, and there's a big hill at the other end of the property with a dam, and I thought we'd build the cellar door up there. But where we're standing at the moment, where the cellar door is, there was actually a whole lot of rubble and concrete from where it had been deposited from the previous owners, essentially. And Ollie said to me, well, Chris, the first principle of sustainable architecture is that you take a distressed and disturbed site that doesn't look natural, and you put a building on that rather than putting a building on a clean site. And then that kind of drove the entire design process. And then we really wanted it to be, you know, one of the things that we coined early on during the design process was a raw exterior and a refined interior. So when you look at the building from the outside, it's got this sort of rusty container look, stone walls made out of rock from the vineyard, unstained decks, and you've got this sort of 360-degree views of vines and things. And then you come inside the building, and it's parquetry floors and beautiful cabinetry and marble and velvet seating and this kind of refined interior. So it's going from this yin and yang of raw exterior settling into the vineyard and looking like the building's part of the landscape to a refined interior where you come in for a luxurious sort of wine tasting. So yeah, it's very cool. And we were very proud. We opened this building in November 2019. Perfect timing with COVID and everything, but we actually had the governor, Hugh Van Lay from South Australia, come down and open the building for us, which is an amazing sort of privilege to have it opened by the governor of South Australia.
Absolutely. So how did you get into the winery business, I guess, or industry? Is it something that's been, you know, part of your family, or what brought you to that industry?
Yeah, so when I was leaving high school, I graduated high school in 1998, and all over the front of the advertised, the local South Australian paper, it was, you know, Australian wine's outselling wine in the UK, beating French wine, and it was a huge boom time for the wine sector here. And I'm dyslexic, so I studied Maths 1, Maths 2, Physics and Chemistry and Drama for my English subject, so I avoided as much written English as I possibly could. And I was going to study engineering with that sort of science background. And then a friend of mine was studying viticulture at uni, and I thought, well, viticulture would be a bit of fun. And the first 2 years are the same, and they went out and pruned a vineyard and thought, oh, maybe I'll enjoy the winemaking side of it, and got a job at a little winery in the Adelaide Hills called Coppermara Wines, just working every Saturday and Sunday, and really fell in love with winemaking. So I kind of just fell into it through studying winemaking and then getting my teeth into working in the sector, which is cool.
So how long have you been making wine, and are you the person who's in charge of the winemaking experience at Dowie Doole?
Yeah, so I mean, Dowie Doole, we're quite a small team. I mean, we're significant as in we've got 69 hectares of our own vineyard in total. So everything's estate grown, estate made. But in total, we've got 5 team members from, you know, basically, you know, production managers to sort of marketing manager in one role. And then we've got, you know, cellar door manager, and then we've got a couple of cellar hands and myself sort of running winemaking in vineyards. And then we've got distributors that we work with selling our wines. But it's really quite a small team. So we're all very immersed in the entire Dowie Doole experience, I suppose. And one of the things that we like to focus on when we're talking about everything that we do from grape growing to wine crafting and making and the experience here at the Cellar Door is that Dowie Doole is a McLaren Vale experience the best of the Australian lifestyle. And that sort of came about from, we'd sell a lot of wine in the UK and out, Nordics and Netherlands and Belgium and things. And you go over and do this tasting. And I find the photos and images that resonated the most were, say, a bottle of Dowie Doole Rosé down at Port Wollonga Beach with a barbecue. And they're just going, oh my God, like who has this type of experience? And I remember I was doing a virtual wine tasting to a distributor in the UK once, and we've got a picture window here at the Cellar Door that looks out over the vineyard, and it was nighttime, so I had that in the background. And I was doing this whole virtual tasting, and then this kangaroo comes jumping through in the background, and they're like, "Oh, is that on a virtual backdrop?" And I'm like, "No, this is our vineyard. This is where I'm standing." And yes, we've got kangaroos running through the vineyard, and they just couldn't believe it. So we're trying to be part of our brand narrative is we're trying to be proudly South Australian, proudly from McLaren Vale, and proudly Australian style of wine, and embracing the best of the Australian culture, because I think that's something that we have that's unique to Australia to showcase to the world.
Absolutely. No, I love that. That would have been a classic moment where you're trying to prove that the kangaroo was real. So you touched a little bit on the style of wine there. Tell us a little bit more about the style of wine. Is it, I know that it obviously changed a little bit year to year, but what's, I guess, at the core of the way that you do the wine at Dowie Doole?
Look, I suppose I'm very lucky. I'm the winemaker, managing director, chief tank cleaner. So I get to make the wines that I like, and then hopefully I find enough people that like to drink them. But generally I've got quite a dry palate, so they're all in a drier style, but they're all trying to, and terroir is probably an overused word in the Australian wine sector, but really try not to manipulate the wines too much, but pick at the right time and really try and make them in a very vibrant style that exhibits the fruit characteristics of the region, supported by subtle use of oak in red wines, but certainly not oak dominant, and something that you'd be quite happy to sit down. Like I was saying, like my vision for our rosé is someone sitting down at the sunset, having a beautiful glass of rosé at the beach they've taken their barbecue down there and they're having some local seafood cooked on the barbecue, a glass of rosé, or they're at an amazing sushi restaurant down in Guja Street in Chinatown in Adelaide, having a glass of the rosé, and it matches the food perfectly. So it's trying to craft a wine that's accessible and enjoyable and is enjoyed with your friends around a table, really.
So I can see some spectacular bottles behind you. Is there a wine at Dowie Doole that you're perhaps most proud of?
Oh, look, it's like having a favourite child. We've all got one, but you never admit it. Or for me, it changes by the day, because I've got one son and one daughter. So I can say to my son, he's my favourite son, and my daughter's my favourite daughter. Look, I think one of the wines that I really love is the Dowie Doole Rosé. It's a bit of a long story, but I was out for a dinner with a barrel supplier one night, and we had a beautiful dinner at Sean's kitchen. He was over from France, and I sent Nicholas an email the next day. I said, "Nicholas, thank you so much for the beautiful dinner. Look forward to catching up the next time you're in Australia, or if I happen to be in France." And I get this email back, and I never forget opening it. And he goes, "Oh, Chris, loved your company. I was thinking about it. Would you and your wife like to come as our guest to the Cannes Film Festival in France next year? Pay for your flights, and we'll look after everything else." And I was like, "Oh my God!" So I went home and said to my wife, Kate, I said, "Look, we've been invited to the Cannes Film Festival. Would you like to?" And I didn't even get to go. It was just like, "Yes, we're going." Like, shortest conversation we've ever had in our lives. But at that stage, our kids were quite young. They were sort of 6 and 7.5. So we ditched them with grandma and grandpa, and we flew into Nice, and then we drove up to Bordeaux over 5 days, and then went back for the Cannes Film Festival. But along the way, we stopped through Aix-en-Provence, and Kate had booked this tasting experience at Chateau Lacoste. If anyone ever finds themselves in Aix-en-Provence, go and check it out. It's amazing, like huge modern art around the vineyard and all sorts of stuff. And went into the winery. I was trying to be incognito, and this young French guy was behind the cellar door, and he goes, "Oh, you're Australian?" And I said, "Yeah, we're Australian." He goes, "Oh, I just did vintage in Australia in McLaren Vale, and I loved the place." I'm like, "Really?" Like, "Yeah, you did vintage in McLaren Vale." So we started tasting, and then he showed us their top rosés at Chateau Lacoste, because that's what they specialize in. And my favorite rosé that they made was a blend of Grenache and Vermentino. And then when I flew back from that trip, I literally, the day I got off the plane, I went and signed the documents to buy this vineyard, which the tasting pod's in now. And it had planted on it 10 hectares of Grenache and 1 hectare of Vermentino. And I thought, right, I know what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to make my own Australian-inspired version of this Provence rosé that I love so much. And then And then we released it in 2017, was the first release, and we got a little gold medal at McLaren Vale Wine Show. Then 2 years later, we took out the trophy for best rosé at Royal Adelaide Wine Show, beating 120 other rosés. And but you know, which is great. But what I'm really proud of with that wine is that consistently, if you go to Adelaide Wine Show or something like that, it's in the top 10. And sometimes you strike midnight and you win a trophy, but it's nicer to get acknowledged. And I think what I also love about that wine is I released, well, and that's the actual rosé. You can see the sort of lovely rose gold color, etc. And I can taste it for you in a second. Talk through the tasting notes. But what I love about that story is that we didn't make that rosé chasing a rosé trend, even though those sort of Provence style rosés are in fashion now. We did that because we loved it, and then it's kind of like the rewards followed because we wanted to do something in that ilk, I suppose. So it's kind of, you know, make the wines that you believe in, and the accolades and things will follow, I suppose, rather than the other way around.
I absolutely love that. I love that. It's like following your passion, and then the rewards will follow. So what's in the future for Dowie Doole?
So I think with our vineyards, we're really trying to focus in on the variety mix that suits what we're trying to achieve, and really get the best out of our two sites. And then, you know, as well as focusing on delivering that McLaren Vale experience like we've spoken about. So, you know, we have a regular weekly meeting here at the Tasting Pod, and we're talking about how do we deliver to our customers that come and visit us or have a tasting at home? How can we deliver a McLaren Vale experience to the best of the Australian lifestyle? And, you know, I think we demonstrated that during COVID. We did at-home tasting packs so people could do Zoom calls and taste together and things. So, but just really sort of drill down on the winemaking style. And I think really focusing in on, you know, Shiraz, and the best example of McLaren Vale Shiraz, because that's still, a lot of people are talking about new varietals, which is really important, but Shiraz is still very, very important to the Australian wine sector and what we're known for overseas. And I still think it's an amazing varietal for McLaren Vale. And then after that, really focusing in on Grenache for me is the next thing. So we're really trying to be specialists, I suppose, in McLaren Vale Shiraz and Grenache, or blends of, and whether that's a Grenache-based rosé or a Shiraz Grenache blend or a GSM, and sort of really sort of drill down into that spectrum of winemaking, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people watching you closely to see what comes out next. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, pleasure, Wendy. Thank you very much for your time, and loved having a chat. So don't be a stranger and come check out the Tasting Pod when you're in SA next time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.